My name is Amelia. I never had a real home. I don't even remember what peace feels like. When I was little, my parents fought every night. The walls shook with their voices. The air was heavy with anger. I used to sit in the corner, covering my ears, waiting for the storm to stop. Sometimes my mother left. Sometimes my father left. But they always came back. Not with love. Only with louder fights. I used to wonder. Why are they so angry? Was it me? Did I do something wrong? One night, when I was only 8 years old, my mother left and never came back. No goodbye. No kiss on the forehead. No promise to return. My father told me. She doesn't love us anymore. But deep down, I knew the truth. She wasn't heartless. She was just tired. Broken. After that, my father changed. He stopped smiling. He stopped cooking. He stopped caring. He drank every day. The bottles were always louder than my voice. He forgot to buy food. He forgot to ask if I had eaten. At night, he sat in the dark, staring at nothing. And I tried to hold the pieces together. I cleaned our small room. I made tea with sugar water. I washed my clothes in a bucket. I was just a child. But I had to survive. Still, my father never looked at me. He never said my name. He never smiled. And then, one morning, I woke up. And he was gone too. No note. No food. No money. I waited all day. I waited all night. But he never came back. I was 10 years old. And I was already completely alone. Backhand index pointing right. Tell me in the comments. Do you believe a child should ever go through this kind of pain? And if you want to hear how Amelia's story unfolds, don't forget to like and subscribe. Because what happens next will break your heart even more. After my father disappeared, the silence became my only company. At first, I stayed in the small room. The walls were cold. The nights were darker than my dreams. There was no light. No water. No warmth. I ate the last piece of dry bread. I drank from a rusty tap behind a building. Every sip tasted like metal and sadness. But I told myself, stay strong, Amelia. Stay strong. A few days later, the landlord came. His eyes were sharp. His voice was cold. You can't stay here. You don't pay rent. I begged. I cried. But he didn't care. I was just a child. But to him, I was just a problem. So, I packed my whole world in one bag. A torn jacket. A small towel. An old notebook with my songs and dreams. That was all I had. And then, I stepped out. Into the streets. I walked for hours. My feet burned. My stomach screamed. Finally, I found a bench in front of a small clinic. I sat down. I looked at the sky. I wanted to cry. But my tears were gone. I was too tired to feel. So I closed my eyes, hugged my bag, and fell asleep in the open air. That night, it rained. The drops were cold on my skin. The world was noisy, cars, dogs, voices. But I had no place to go. The bench became my bed. The rain became my blanket. For the first time, I realized what it meant to be invisible. People walked past me. Nobody cared. Nobody asked, "Are you okay?" I was 10 years old. And I was already forgotten. The days after I lost my home blurred together like a gray sky. I wandered through streets that smelled of smoke and dust, searching for warmth in a world that had none to offer me. My name was Amelia, but on the streets, I was just another shadow people stepped around. Each morning, I woke up stiff and cold from the bench or corner I had chosen the night before. My bag, my only possession, was always tucked under my head. As if the little notebook inside held the last pieces of who I was. Sometimes I told myself that as long as I had those songs, I was still alive. But hunger is a cruel companion. It gnaws at you slowly, making every step heavier than the last. I learned where I could drink water. A public tap behind a building. A dripping pipe near the market. Food was harder. Sometimes, a half-eaten piece of bread from the trash. Sometimes, nothing. Yet, even in that emptiness, there was one thing I carried inside me. Something no one could take away. My voice. It began one rainy afternoon. The kind of rain that soaks your clothes in minutes and chills your bones. I had taken shelter under the roof of a broken gate in a park. My jacket was useless against the cold. I hugged my knees to my chest, listening to the drops drum against the tin above me. And then, I started to sing. I don't know why. Maybe it was because my body wanted warmth. And singing was the only warmth I knew. Maybe it was because the rain sounded like a rhythm. And I wanted to join in. The song was soft, almost like a whisper. It was one I remembered from school. A melody my teacher used to hum when she thought no one was listening. The words were simple. But to me, they felt like prayer. As I sang, I closed my eyes. For a moment, I wasn't a homeless child. I wasn't invisible. I was just a girl singing her heart out to the rain. When I finished, I opened my eyes. And saw someone standing there. A woman with a small dog on a leash. She was watching me. I froze. I thought she would laugh. Or tell me to stop. But instead, she smiled. "You have a sweet voice," she said softly. Then she dropped a coin in front of me. And walked away with her dog. It was just one coin. But to me, it was more than money. It was proof that someone heard me. That I wasn't completely invisible. The next day, I sang again. This time near the bus stop. I didn't expect much. But I sang anyway. Little songs I made up. Words scribbled in my notebook. Some people ignored me. Some laughed. A few called me crazy. But every now and then, someone would pause. Listen for a moment. And leave a coin. It was enough for bread. Sometimes enough for tea. I wasn't singing for money, though. I was singing to stay alive. Each note reminded me I was still here. That even if my parents had left, even if the world didn't care, I still had a voice. One evening, I sat near a tea shop as rain poured down again. My hair was dripping. My clothes clung to me. My bag was wet. But I sang anyway. A song about rain and dreams. A song about being lost. But still hoping to be found. I didn't know that behind me, someone was watching. She was older. With white hair and glasses. And a blue coat that looked warm and heavy. In her hands was a paper bag filled with groceries. She stood by the shop door. Listening. Her eyes didn't look at me with pity. But with something else. Something I hadn't seen in a long time. When I finished the song, she stepped forward. "What is your name?" she asked. I hesitated. I looked down at her shoes. Scared to meet her eyes. But her voice was gentle. So I whispered, "Amelia." She smiled. "Do you live nearby?" I shook my head. "I sleep near the park," I said softly. She didn't laugh. She didn't walk away. Instead, she said, "Would you like to come with me? Just for tea?" My heart pounded. Part of me wanted to say no. The streets had taught me not to trust easily. But she looked kind. And I was so cold. So hungry. So I nodded. That moment. The moment I followed her was the beginning of everything. I didn't know it yet. But that night would change my life forever. Because sometimes, one song, one stranger, one act of kindness can open a door you never thought existed. I followed the woman in the blue coat through quiet streets glistening with rain. The sky was heavy and gray, and puddles reflected the yellow glow of the street lights. I walked a few steps behind her, clutching my wet bag to my chest. Each step felt like it could be a mistake. What if she wasn't kind? What if this was a trap? But the cold air bit into my skin. And the hunger in my stomach was louder than fear. So I kept walking. After a few minutes, we stopped in front of a small house with a white fence. The gate was lined with red flowers, their petals shining from the rain. The windows glowed warm and golden, like sunlight had been trapped inside. She opened the gate and said softly, "Come in, Amelia." It felt strange to hear my name spoken with kindness. I hadn't heard it that way in years. Inside, the house smelled like fresh bread and old books. The air was warm, wrapping around me like a blanket. My shoes left small puddles on the wooden floor as I stepped inside. I wanted to apologize. But before I could, she smiled and said, "It's only water. Don't worry." She took my wet jacket and hung it by the door. Then she led me into the kitchen. The room was small but bright, with shelves full of jars and a table covered with a checkered cloth. She placed her paper bag on the counter, then filled a kettle with water. "Sit, dear," she said. I sat slowly, gripping the edge of the chair, unsure if I was allowed. When the kettle whistled, she poured steaming tea into a mug. She added milk and a spoonful of sugar, stirring gently before setting it in front of me. Beside it, she placed a plate with 2 slices of bread spread with thick strawberry jam. The smell made my stomach twist painfully. I hadn't eaten properly in days. "Go ahead," she urged. I didn't wait. I grabbed the bread and took big, messy bites. The sweetness of the jam filled my mouth. Tears burned my eyes, but I kept eating. She sat across from me, her hands folded, just watching with a soft smile. After a moment, she said, "My name is Grace. I used to be a music teacher." I swallowed quickly and nodded. "I'm Amelia." "Yes, you told me," she said kindly. Amelia, a beautiful name for a beautiful voice. I looked down, embarrassed. "I just sing what I feel." Grace leaned back in her chair, her eyes thoughtful. "That is the best kind of singing," she said. "The kind that comes from the heart." After I finished eating, she handed me a towel. "Dry your hair. You'll catch a cold." I rubbed my hair with the towel, still not believing I was here. The room felt safe, too safe. Like if I breathed too loudly, the dream would end and I'd be back on the street. Grace stood and said gently, "You can sleep on the sofa tonight, Amelia. It's not much, but at least you won't be in the rain." The words hit me like a wave. I nodded quickly, unable to speak. That night, I lay on her sofa with a blanket tucked around me. The cushions were soft, and the hum of the rain outside was far away, not on my skin. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in weeks, I fell asleep without fear. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the curtains. I woke to the smell of warm porridge and cinnamon. Grace was already in the kitchen, humming a tune as she stirred a pot. "Good morning," she said cheerfully. I had almost forgotten what it felt like to be greeted that way. Over breakfast, she asked me to sing for her again. I hesitated, my voice always felt too small indoors. But her eyes were gentle. So I opened my notebook and chose a song I had written. It was about cold nights and the hope of morning. I closed my eyes and sang. My voice trembled at first. But then it grew stronger, filling the small kitchen. When I finished, the room was quiet. When I looked up, Grace's eyes were wet with tears. She reached across the table and touched my hand. "You have a gift, Amelia. Never forget that." In the days that followed, I stayed with her longer than I expected. Each morning, I helped sweep her small house, wash dishes, fold laundry. After lunch, we sat together at her old keyboard. She taught me simple melodies, and I sang my songs while she played. Her house filled with music every afternoon. For the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged somewhere. One evening, as we sat by the fire, Grace looked at me and said, "There's a small community event at the local hall every Sunday. Young people sing, or read poems, or play instruments. I think you should go. Let people hear your voice." The thought made my stomach twist. Me? Sing in front of strangers? I wanted to say no. But Grace believed in me. And her belief felt like a light I didn't want to lose. So I whispered, "Okay." She smiled, as if she knew I would say yes. And in that moment, I realized something. Grace wasn't just giving me food or shelter. She was giving me something far more powerful. A chance. Sunday came faster than I wanted. All week I had been thinking about it. The hall, the stage, the people. Every time I imagined standing there, my chest tightened. And my hands began to shake. Grace noticed, of course. She always noticed. "You're ready, Amelia," she said one evening as she folded laundry. "Your voice is not only strong, it's true. People need to hear it." But I wasn't sure. I was just a girl who once slept in the rain. What could my voice matter to anyone? Still, I had said yes. And a promise, even a small one, meant something. That Sunday afternoon, Grace gave me clean clothes. A soft white blouse and a dark skirt. She brushed my hair, pulling it back with a ribbon. When I looked at myself in her mirror, I barely recognized the reflection. I looked like a real girl. Not a hungry one. Not a forgotten one. For a moment, my eyes stung with tears. Grace touched my shoulder gently. "See? You are shining already." We walked together to the hall. The streets were busy with families carrying baskets of food. Children running, shopkeepers closing their doors. My steps grew heavier the closer we got. The hall was not grand. Just a small building with peeling paint. But to me, it looked enormous. People stood outside chatting. And laughter floated through the air. Inside, the hall smelled of wood and dust. Chairs were lined up in rows. And at the front stood a small stage with a microphone. I stared at it as though it were a mountain I could never climb. We sat in the back row. Grace squeezed my hand. "Wait until it's your turn. Just breathe." The event began. One boy read a poem about the sea. A girl played a violin, her bow trembling but steady enough. Two children sang a folk song together. Their voices thin but full of joy. People clapped politely, warmly. No one laughed or mocked. That gave me a little courage. Then the man at the front called my name. "Amelia." My stomach dropped. My legs turned heavy as stone. But Grace nudged me gently. I stood up, clutching my notebook so tightly. My knuckles turned white. Each step to the stage felt longer than the last. The lights above made my face hot. I could see the faces in the crowd. Not many, maybe 10 or 12. But it felt like hundreds. I stood in front of the microphone. My mouth was dry. My voice almost vanished. But then I remembered the nights in the park. The rain on my skin. The songs I sang just to feel alive. Nobody had listened then. But I had still sung. So I opened my notebook. I closed my eyes. And I began. My voice was small at first, barely more than a whisper. I sang about loneliness. About waiting for someone who never came. About the cold nights when I curled up under broken benches. But slowly, my voice grew. I sang about hope. About how the rain could wash away sorrow. How dreams could still bloom in the cracks of broken concrete. The hall grew quiet. I did not hear movement. Only my own voice filling the air. When the last note faded, I opened my eyes. The room was still. For one terrifying second, I thought they hated it. Then someone clapped. Then another. Then all of them. The sound was not loud, not wild. But it was real. People were clapping for me. For my voice. I looked toward the back. Grace was standing, her hands together. Her eyes wet with tears. She was smiling. A smile so wide and proud. It lit up the whole room for me. My chest ached. But not with fear. With something else. Something bigger. Pride. Afterward, people came up to me. A woman touched my arm and said softly, "You sing with so much heart." A young man nodded and said, "I felt every word." I didn't know what to say. I wasn't used to kind words. So I just smiled shyly and whispered, "Thank you." When we walked home, the night air felt different. It didn't bite or sting. It felt soft, almost gentle. Like the world had shifted a little. Grace walked beside me. Her step steady, her hand warm around mine. "You see," she said. "You are not invisible anymore." That night, lying on her sofa, I stared at the stars through the window. I held my notebook close and whispered, "Thank you." Not just to Grace. Not just to the people who clapped. But to the world itself. For giving me this one, small chance. For the first time in a long time, I believed tomorrow could be brighter than yesterday. The Sunday performance stayed with me for days. Not just the sound of clapping hands. But the feeling that, for a few minutes, I had truly existed in someone else's eyes. I thought it would end there. A memory to keep in my notebook. But Grace had other plans. One morning, as I washed dishes in her small kitchen, she sat at the table with the telephone pressed to her ear. Her voice was calm but firm. Yes, she's young, but her voice has a soul in it. You'll understand if you just listen. When she hung up, she looked at me with a spark in her eyes. "Amelia, I've spoken to Mr. Clark. He runs the local radio station. He said you can come on Tuesday to sing one song." I nearly dropped the plate in my hand. "Radio? Me?" Grace nodded, smiling. "Yes, you." "Why not?" "Because I was no one. Because I used to sleep on benches. Because I was still scared of mirrors." But the words wouldn't come out. Instead, I whispered, "Do you really think I can?" She touched my cheek gently. "I don't just think, Amelia. I know." The night before Tuesday, I could not sleep. I paced the small living room with my notebook pressed to my chest. The rain tapped against the windows, reminding me of all the nights I had curled up in its cold arms. That was when I knew which song to sing. The rain still knows my name. It was the one that came to me on the wettest, loneliest night. When I thought the world had forgotten me. It was my truest song. I practiced softly until my throat ached. Then lay awake listening to the clock tick. Praying I would not lose my courage by morning. Tuesday came. Grace lent me a blue dress and brushed my hair back neatly. "You look like someone the world is about to hear," she said. We walked together through the streets. My stomach tied in knots. The radio building stood on the corner of an old road. A faded yellow place with peeling paint. And posters of singers smiling from the windows. Inside, it smelled of dust and paper. We sat in a small waiting area with cracked chairs. I could hear voices through a closed door. A man laughing, a woman speaking quickly. Every tick of the clock made me more nervous. I almost wanted to run. Then the door opened. A man with glasses and kind eyes stepped out. "Amelia?" My throat tightened. "Yes," I whispered. Come with me, he said warmly. The recording room was small, with walls covered in strange gray foam. A large microphone stood in the center, its metal shining under a lamp. There was a table, 2 chairs, and wires everywhere. Sit, Mr. Clark said gently. Don't be afraid. Just imagine you are singing to the rain itself. My hands trembled as I held my notebook. Grace gave me an encouraging nod from the corner. I closed my eyes. I took one deep breath. And I began. My voice filled the room. At first, shaky. But then stronger. As if each note was pulling me upward. Away from the girl who once shivered on cold benches. I sang of wet nights. Of silent streets. Of how the rain whispered to me when no one else did. I sang of how hope, faint but alive, still glowed inside even when everything else was gone. When the last note fell quiet, I opened my eyes. Mr. Clark's face was still, his eyes watching me carefully. For a heartbeat, I thought I had failed. Then he leaned back and said softly, "That was beautiful." Grace's hands were pressed together, her eyes bright with tears. Mr. Clark smiled. "We'll play this on air tomorrow. People need to hear it." My breath caught. "On the radio?" "Yes," he said. "Your voice deserves more than silence." Walking home, the streets felt different. The same cracks in the pavement. The same broken lampposts. But I no longer felt like a shadow passing unnoticed. People would hear me. People who didn't know my face, my story, my pain. They would still hear my heart. That night, lying on Grace's sofa, I could not stop smiling. I wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring. But for the first time, the world felt like it was opening. Slowly, like a door I never thought would unlock. I held my notebook close and whispered to myself. Maybe the rain was listening all along. The morning the song was set to play, I woke before sunrise. The sky was pale gray, heavy with clouds. The kind of sky that promised more rain. Grace made tea and toast. We sat at her wooden table, waiting for the clock to strike 9. The little radio on the shelf crackled with static, as if it too were nervous. At 9 sharp, a familiar voice filled the room, Mr. Clark. "Good morning, dear listeners. Today we have something special. A new voice from right here in our town. Her name is Amelia, and her song is called 'The Rain Still Knows My Name.'" I froze. It felt strange hearing my name spoken aloud. As if it no longer belonged only to me. Then the music began. And my voice, my trembling, fragile voice, slipped into the airwaves. I didn't sound like myself. I sounded braver, fuller, stronger. The microphone had caught more than words. It had captured the part of me I usually tried to hide. Grace squeezed my hand. Her eyes shone. When the song ended, silence filled the kitchen. Then Mr. Clark's voice returned, soft but certain. "Sometimes, dear listeners, we meet voices that remind us that even in the darkest night, hope sings." Thank you, Amelia. I buried my face in my hands. For the first time, I cried not from pain, but from joy too big to hold inside. Later that day, something strange began to happen. When I walked to the market with Grace, a woman selling vegetables looked up and said, "Weren't you the girl on the radio?" I nodded, blushing. She smiled. "Your song made me remember my mother. She used to sing in the rain." "Thank you." At the bakery, a man slipped an extra roll into our bag. "No charge," he said, "for the girl who sings like the sky." Even children in the park pointed at me. "You were on the radio," they laughed. I wasn't invisible anymore. The world had heard me, and somehow, it had decided I mattered. That evening, the telephone in Grace's house began to ring. First, it was a neighbor. Could Amelia sing at the church gathering? Then, a teacher. Would Amelia visit the school to sing for the children? Then, a cafe owner. Would Amelia sing at our Friday night event? I stood there, stunned. As Grace wrote down each request on a piece of paper. Her hands moved quickly, but her smile never faded. "See, Amelia," she whispered. "The world has been waiting for you." That night, I sat by the window with my notebook. The rain fell steadily, its rhythm like a quiet drumbeat. I remembered the nights when it had been my only friend. When I whispered secrets to the sky. When I thought no one would ever listen. But now, the rain didn't feel lonely. It felt like an old companion. Proud to see me step into the light. For the first time in my life, I felt like the world wanted me here. And the thought both terrified and thrilled me. Weeks passed, and each one brought new doors opening. I sang at the church gathering. My voice rising under the tall ceilings. Echoing through the wooden pews. I sang at the school. Where children clapped along. And asked me to teach them songs. I sang at the cafe. Where strangers sat with their cups of coffee. And leaned in to listen as if my words mattered. With every song, my fear shrank. And my courage grew. But the most important change was inside me. I no longer felt like the girl who had been abandoned. I no longer felt like the shadow sleeping on benches. I felt like someone building a life. Note by note, word by word. Grace was always by my side. She guided me, encouraged me. And sometimes just sat quietly. Letting me know I didn't have to be alone. One evening, after a small performance, we walked home under the stars. She held my hand gently. "Amelia," she said. "You know you don't have to leave here, right? This house, it can be your home too." I stopped walking. Her words wrapped around me like a warm blanket. Home. A word I had long feared. A word I thought would never belong to me. My throat tightened. Tears blurred my vision. "Yes," I whispered. "I would like that." From that night on, the house with red flowers by the gate wasn't just Grace's house. It was our house. I decorated my small room with paper stars I cut myself. I placed my notebook on the desk beside the old keyboard. I filled the walls with songs. Every night, as I lay in bed, I felt safe. I felt seen. I felt at home. Months later, Mr. Clark invited me again to the station. This time, not as a guest, but as a singer whose songs people requested. Sitting in that same foam-covered room, I thought of the journey behind me. The corner where I cried as a child. The park bench where I sang for coins. The woman in the blue coat who changed my life. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and began to sing. This time I wasn't singing to survive. I was singing to live. And so, the rain still knows my name. But now, so does the world. And most of all, so do I. For the first time, I am not just Amelia the girl who was left behind. I am Amelia, the girl who sings. The girl who found a voice. The girl who finally found home. Thank you for watching this emotional love story on the Love Chapter by Aree. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more heart-touching stories. Tell us in the comments which country or place you are watching from. We'd love to know where our family of viewers is growing around the world.